Don't have an intro yet, but here to talk about Champions League quarterfinals. Let's get after it. All right, starting off with the big one, Arsenal versus Real Madrid, probably the most anticipated fixture of the four quarterfinals, due to the nature of the fact. If you go online, you see the Arsenal Madrid combined 11s, and I think over the last couple of seasons you can have a laugh at those. But regardless, the tie is here for us on Tuesday. So looking at Arsenal going into this game, their form hasn't really been anything to write home about. Coming off a draw away at Everton this past weekend, looking maybe a bit lackluster. A positive for them is Saka's come back, got a goal against Fulham midweek. I think without Saka, I wouldn't give Arsenal any chance in this tie. However, I think Saka for me has to be the difference maker if Arsenal are to see a way past Madrid. I think Arsenal's absences, such as the Gabriel injury, and then you have Timber, Calafiori out, which I think for someone like Urian Timber would be crucial to this tie in terms of stopping someone like Vinicius Jr., Rodrigo, or Mbappe, just pocketing them for 90 minutes, potentially 180 minutes. I think Arsenal's defense is still very strong. I think I have questions though about Kylian. I think he's an okay player. I think if you were like someone like Real Madrid, you're going to be looking to exploit that. In terms of the other players on Arsenal's team going into this game, I think if you have a defense that's kind of like are missing a lot of players, I think you're going to expect Thomas Partey to be a right back if Ben White's not available. I think his availability for this tie is up in the air. But let's say Thomas Partey is playing right back. I still think in the midfield, I think it's going to be important for Arsenal to win the midfield battle against Madrid, and I'll get onto them in terms of their absences for this fixture. I think someone like Declan Rice was going to be absolutely crucial for Arsenal's success, as well as, again, I think players like Odegaard to become difference makers within the tie coming up against his former club. Now, obviously up top, I don't know how Arsenal are planning to line up, if Marino's going to be playing up top or if it's going to be something along of like Trossard. Who knows? I think you look at Madrid's defense, I think even like their defense has been pretty weak. You look at that against Valencia, you see against Sociedad, Madrid not really in the best form. I think even despite winning against Sociedad midweek, they lost to a late Hugo Doro winner at the Bernabeu last weekend. I think you look at Madrid, you definitely can get that done defensively. I think if you look at the performances Madrid put in this season, I think they've been lackluster. I think a lot of the games have been, I don't want to say getting bailed out by individual quality, but I think you can't, when you have players like Mbappe, Vinicius, and Rodrigo, and Jude Bellingham, they're always going to impose themselves on games and dig you out of games when you're not playing well. So for me, I think that will be Arsenal's main goal, is to see how much you can limit the individual factors or the individual quality of the likes of Mbappe or Rodrigo, Vinicius Jr., Jude Bellingham. Because for me, Madrid as a team, as a system, they're not really that great. I think if you look back to the Atletico tie, I think, in my opinion, I think across two legs, I think Atletico were the slightly better team. I don't think Madrid looked that great against Atleti, and Atleti are a team that have always given Madrid problems. Arsenal versus Madrid is not of late. I don't think they've played each other since Thierry Henry was playing for Arsenal. And for me, what's crucial is the absentees for Madrid. Obviously, Madrid will have their front three or front four if you want to include Bellingham. However, they are missing too many for this game. Too many suspended. Courtois is unfortunately coming back. But for me, I want to focus on the midfield because I think the loss of too many is crucial because I think Arsenal have the opportunity, especially the first leg at the Emirates, to absolutely dominate Real Madrid in the midfield. If you look at Arsenal's midfield, you get Declan Rice. If Maria's playing in the midfield, if he's not playing up top. Even Odegaard, all these guys are physically inept. They're tall, they're big, they're athletic, right? I look at Madrid's midfield, not too many. Look, they have Valverde and Camavinga, right, who are athletes themselves, right? However, Camavinga is most likely to be playing left back because Ferland Mendy's not available. I think Fede, I think you need him in the midfield in this game, but with Lucas Vazquez at right back, I know he's going to be up against Martinelli, right? And look, Martinelli's not been the best form for the last year and a half. However, if I still think someone like Martinelli could get the best out, can get hit the best between him and Lucas Vazquez. So for me, it comes up if Ancelotti weighs the fact of, oh, do I want to play Fede Valverde at right back or in the midfield? I think Fede has to play in the midfield, or else it's going to be a blowout. I think Arsenal will just dictate the midfield game, and Real Madrid will just play on the counter against Arsenal. Um, that being said, like someone like Luka Modric in this game, I don't think will thrive at his age, unfortunately, because I just think, like I said, I think the physicality of Arsenal's team would just be too much. You can ask for someone like Raheem Diaz maybe to come in and you drop Jude a little bit deeper. That's a possibility. But I still think Arsenal first leg have an opportunity here, despite their absentees. For me, if I looking at this game on paper, I would tell you that Arsenal really need to win the first leg, park it at the Bernabeu, just use your defensive prowess, just stipend Madrid's attack. Do I think they can do that without Gabriel? I don't think so. I think Gabriel's probably been Arsenal's best defender this season. Arguably, you can argue player. I think again, like someone like Timber being absent from this tie is devastating for Arsenal. I think you need him to stipend someone like Vinicius Jr. or Rodrigo, depending if you're playing right back or left back, for 90, 180 minutes. I think I look at Lewis Skelly, who I think he's a very talented player. I think you have questions about in terms of his hot-headedness, in terms of in such a pivotal tie like this, like can he control himself? You saw him get subbed out against PSV, right? Almost being sent off there. Arteta took him out when he was on a yellow card in the first half. I have question marks saying like, can he make a boneheaded decision just from his inexperience in a tie like this? And one thing to note is Arsenal in these big games. I think they're a team that plays with a lot of emotion. You saw it. You've seen it in games against City during the title race in the past couple of years. You saw it against Bayern. I think they're a team that feeds off the emotion, but I also think that also can hurt them in the sense they can get too emotional, they can lose their heads, lose their composure. And I think at that point, Arsenal's system will become more open, and then you get players like Vinicius Jr., Kylian Mbappe, and Rodrigo just exploiting Arsenal's emotional wreck from disrupting the system. So, my prediction for this tie, I think the first leg at the Emirates, I think it'll be a tight one. However, I still would back Madrid to win the first leg. I would say like 2-1. Like I said, I think the emotions and the pressure will get to Arsenal. I look at players like Lewis Skelly. I think he's a very good player. However, I just think like at the inexperience and like in terms of him being able to control his temper and something in a game of this magnitude, I think is too much of a risk, too much of a factor to actually consider within this tie. Like I said, I do think Arsenal can dominate the midfield. However, I think Fede will be playing in the midfield just due to the fact that like you look at the matchup between Martinelli and Vasquez. Even though I said Martinelli could get the best of Vasquez, like at the end of the day, Martinelli is not the best winger in the world. You could get away with Lucas Vasquez against Martinelli or Troy Starter, whoever's out there. But we'll see. So I'm predicting 2-1 the first leg. I think when you take it to the Bernabeu, I think that's when you'll see Arsenal get outsourced. You saw them go away to Bayern last year. I think Arsenal are not used to going away to these European grounds, these big European grounds and knockout games. I think they'll just be shocked by the atmosphere of the Bernabeu and feed off the crowd and just finish them off. They'll just call the tie done. So I'm saying 2-0 the Bernabeu. I'm saying Madrid go 4-1 against Arsenal in aggregate. Okay, so next tie, Bayern Munich versus Inter Milan. You look at Bayern Munich going into this game, probably one of the most informed teams in Europe as of late. I think the Leverkusen tie really shoved a lot of critics about Bayern Munich from earlier on this season when you can criticize Vincent Kompany and Bayern in terms of they weren't really playing well. How well did they really perform against the bigger teams, right? Sure, they were top of the Bundesliga, but whenever you had big games against Leverkusen, Dortmund, or in the Champions League, you had questions whether Bayern were really up to the standard of those big teams or were able to compete with those big teams, right, in these big games. However, I think the Leverkusen tie really shut up a lot of people about Bayern playing well. I think a lot of people would have favored Leverkusen in that game. Just the fact that Leverkusen beat Bayern Munich in the Cup earlier that season and drew away to Bayern Munich. And plus, Xabi Alonso is a better manager than Vincent Kompany. Now, regardless of that, Harry Kane, I think, was the difference maker in that tie. Again, proving that he can be a pivotal player within these big European games. Looking at Inter, their perspective, another team that's probably one of the best teams in Europe at the moment. Defensively resolute, only conceding 2 goals in the Champions League this season, making quick work at Feyenoord in the round of 16. I think about Inter this season against the bigger teams. I think Inter are a team that struggle for goals in these ties or maybe struggle to impose heavy leads. Yes, they're a more defensive team. They're an Italian team. I know their Italian teams are more defensive resolute, more of like a 1-0 type of team. But I think really Inter really imposes, even in games in Italy this year. I think against some of the bigger clubs, like when they face up against Juve and Napoli, I think sure they can take an early lead, or maybe they struggle to find a goal and they just don't really close the game out, and then eventually the other team scores, and then they drop points in the league. And I think in Europe this season, as well as like I'm thinking about to the group stage game against Leverkusen, away at Leverkusen, where Leverkusen scored a late equalizer. So looking at how Inter and Bayern match up against each other. Now, the big story, I guess, going into this game is the amount of absentees Bayern Munich have. Missing Musiala, Upamecano, Pavlovic has been out for a while, Manuel Neuer. I think all these are notable absentees in this tie. Again, Inter Milan not really missing anybody, almost a fully fit team. I think this tie won't have many goals in it. I know I just mentioned Harry Kane's a goal that can be the difference maker, but as much as he can be the difference maker, I don't see him scoring a bundle of goals. I think Inter is probably, if not the best defensive team in Europe. I think I look at up top for Inter, like Lautaro Martinez and Marcus Thuram. I think they're good players, but I do question how much of goal scorers they are at times. Like, yes, these guys can put up, like Lautaro Martinez, we saw him put over 20 goals in the Serie A last year. However, I still kind of question Lautaro in big games, especially at club level. Just in my opinion, I think he's a good player. I think a lot of people do underrate Lautaro Martinez. However, I do question in terms of his goal scoring ability or his willingness to impose himself again. I feel like Lautaro Martinez, I'm also get a couple of Thuram in this. I feel like sometimes in the big games I'm watching the season, they kind of go hiding. I wouldn't say they have like a disaster class, but I just feel like they don't really demand the ball. They don't really go hiding. I know strikers need service, everything like that, but I expect more from them. Couldn't they oppose themselves on this tie and prove me wrong? 100%. However, I just don't really see Marcus Thuram and Lautaro Martinez really exploiting Bayern, especially in terms of their frailties in defense. Now, losing Upamecano, who's been one of Bayern's better defenders this season, is a huge loss. And I look at someone like Kim and Jae, who I think you have question marks, especially if I think back to last season about how Vinicius exploited him. However, I think Bayern's weakness in terms of how you can get that at them defensively is through pace. And Inter are not a fast team. They don't really have a lot of pace up top. Like, sure, you can have someone like Marcus Thuram run the channels, but I don't think it will be enough to really put Bayern under serious pressure defensively. Again, I forgot to mention that they're missing Alphonso Davies as well, which offers a lot of pace up the left-hand side, especially defensively. I don't see, even with his absence, I don't really see Inter rather, exploiting that to a degree. I think the midfield battle will be very interesting in this game. You're looking at Barella and Kimmich, I think, two of the best midfielders in Europe this season. I think someone like Goretzka is coming back into the team. Calhanoglu, who's been all right this season, I think, we'll see what Inter can do. For Tessie, I think it's been hot and cold for Inter. I think it's all going to be, this game's really going to be decided in the midfield, and I think it's going to be a narrow result, and it's going to come down to individual brilliance, and I think Bayern have more of that. I look at someone like Harry Kane, who can just produce a goal pretty much for nothing. I think Michael Olise, I think, will be probably the player to decide this tie, in my opinion. I think the absence of Musiala, I think the onus will be on him to create a moment for Bayern. So what my prediction is going to be, I think Bayern will win 1-0 in the first leg at home. I just think, again, like I said, I think Inter struggle to find goals in these games. They can be defensively resolute. There's no questions on Inter defensively. Right? I think Jan Sommer is always a player that turns up against Bayern Munich. You can see it for his Gladbach days. So, like I said, I think Bayern will win the first leg just narrowly, and then going back to Milan, I think Inter will probably win that maybe 1-0 as well. So I think this game will actually be decided either in extra time or on penalties. I think it'll just be drawn out. I think it'll just be a really tactical game between Inzaghi and company. And on penalties, I'm gonna back Inter on penalties to go. I know they lost on penalties against Atleti last season and with Lautaro Sky in it. However, I just feel that Inter are the more well-drilled team, and if they, and that's my prediction. I think it'll just come down to penalties. I think there's not really much separating these two teams in terms of or in terms of their form. I think they cancel each other out in many different ways. So that's my prediction. I think Inter just will get through on penalties. Okay, Dortmund Barcelona. So Barcelona probably coming in as heavy favorites into this tie, coming off a 1-1 draw at Betis at the weekend. For me, not really many takeaways from that game in particular. I think many people are overplaying that result. I think Barcelona in that game, I think they looked all right. I don't think they look, obviously they played better this season. I just think that was just a day where their attack wasn't really going for them. I think Yamal was just ineffective in that game. Just had another one of those games where you look at him and say, okay, he's 17 years old. So not much to take away. Plus, Betis are one of the more informed teams in Europe that season. I just don't think there's many takeaways from there. Plus, Barca remain unbeaten in 2025. Now looking at Dortmund's form, Dortmund coming off a 4-1 win away at Freiburg at the weekend. I think they've looked slightly better than Niko Kovac, not exceptionally better. I think Nuri Sahin, yes, he had to go. In my opinion, Dortmund's form, they're staying mid-table in the Bundesliga. Kovac has slightly improved them. I don't think by much, though. I think this is still the same Dortmund team we've seen throughout the entire season. So looking at this tie, Barca coming in as heavy favorites. Now, for me, Barca, you look at their attack, you know they're guaranteed goals. You saw it against Benfica. You've seen it in pretty much every game this season. This is a team that will create chances for fun. Dortmund, on the other hand, defensively, I think the narrative around Dortmund defensively is they're not really that defensively resolute, and you see it throughout their different Champions League campaigns. I think last year you saw something a little bit different. You saw a Dortmund team that actually could defend, made their way to a Champions League final when everyone doubted them. I think a lot of people are doubting Dortmund going to this tie. Do I still pick them maybe to beat Barcelona? I don't really see it because I think no matter how Dortmund approaches this game, I think it plays into Barcelona's favor. Now, do Dortmund have players who I think can hurt Barcelona? Yes, I think someone like Guirassy, who's the top goal scorer in the Champions League, or as of this moment, correct me if I'm wrong, can cause them problems. I look at players like Adeyemi, Julian Brandt, even Byron Gins. I think all these guys have the potential to cause problems for Barcelona. However, do I think that will be enough to compete with Yamal, Rafinha, Lewandowski, even for me, or even Ferran Torres in great form right now? I don't see it. And if Dortmund try to go goal or open up and try to go, I guess, goal for goal with Barcelona, I think Barcelona will come out on top. Plus, a key thing about Barcelona this season is if you look at their past results over the last month, 2 months, they haven't been conceding a lot of goals. You could say earlier on in the season, they've conceded goals, and their main strategy, I guess you could say, is just to outscore opponents under Hansi Flick. However, you look of late, they're not conceding, and they're blowing teams out the water. Now, if Dortmund go defensively resolute, which I think, to give them some credit, I look at the defenders, I don't think they're terrible. I think they could. However, I think Barcelona, to sustain that level of pressure over 180 minutes against Barcelona is pretty much impossible. And we've seen Barcelona this season get frustrated against teams that park the bus and cause them defensive or defensively sound, such as Betis. I think back to Getafe away earlier on the season, where Barcelona just didn't have it. You can catch Barcelona on an off day just by shutting them out, but I think Barcelona are inevitable to create chances. And I think on these Champions League moments, you have players like Rafinha, Yamal, Lewandowski just rise to the occasion. So, do I think Dortmund have an opportunity to beat Barcelona? I just don't see it. Barcelona, for me, are the best team in Europe right now, or the most informed team at least in Europe, and right now they look unbeatable. So, my prediction for this tie, I'm going 3-1 Barcelona at the Camp Nou or in Barcelona, and away at Dortmund, I'm going 3-2 Barcelona at Dortmund. And actually, just a quick fact, we did see this fixture play out between the two teams earlier on in the season. We saw Barca come on top against Dortmund at their place, so that's another reason why I picked Barcelona for Dortmund, just based off that game. Again, so I'm going 3-1 Barcelona at Barcelona in Barcelona, and then 3-2 Barcelona away at Dortmund, so 6-3 in aggregate. And now finally, PSG versus Aston Villa. For me personally, this is the most intriguing tie. I think there's just a lot going into this because Villa, very strong form now, seem to be peaking at the right moment. PSG last weekend just wrapped up the league. You look at Aston Villa in terms of their recent results, a midweek win against Brighton, right? 3-0 is a bit um, misleading in my opinion. I think Brighton also created their chance in the game, but this Villa did well to stifle Brighton in that game. Came away with a huge result for them in terms of their top four push for Champions League football next season. PSG winning at home over the weekend to cement or to confirm the fact they are League One champions. Right now, can put full focus pretty much on the Champions League. Now, this tie is very interesting because I think a lot of people have PSG as strong favorites, especially after what they saw against Liverpool, especially in the first leg, where PSG looked like they should have won 5-0 if it wasn't for Alisson's heroics. Do I think PSG will replicate that against Villa in the first leg, knowing the first leg is at Paris? I think they will to an extent. However, I think Unai Emery, more experience than Arne Slot in Europe, I think will set his team up. Will set his team up better against Luis Enrique, which is actually interesting because if you think about both managers were there when the 6-1 comeback for Barcelona. But regardless, I think Unai Emery will set his team up more defensively sound against PSG. I think PSG will be the protagonist throughout this tie. I think they just do have the better players in terms of individual quality and technical ability. I think there's question marks over what each. I think this is really going to come down to the attackers of each team. You look at Marco Asensio for Villa on loan from PSG, has been great form for Aston Villa. What can he do against his former team? Marcus Rashford seems to be picking up some form for Villa. Right, we also remember that tie that night in Paris, a young Marcus Rashford scoring a last-minute penalty to send United through. Can he replicate that again against PSG? I possibly. And with Rashford, when he gets hot, he gets hot. So Rashford carrying a lot of momentum in this game definitely could be a factor. Ollie Watkins, I look at this game. For me, Ollie Watkins this season, I think relative to the last 2 years, probably a bit more of an underwhelming year. I think John Duran, who's not obviously at the club anymore, competing with him for minutes. Duran obviously leaving. Ollie Watkins, I think, has been hot and cold this season, maybe with a point to prove in this game, right? I think he can be a factor. However, I don't know. I still kind of doubt his form a little bit this season. Then we look at PSG, their Tigers, Ousmane Dembele, one of the most informed attackers in Europe this season, right? Or some say could be a favorite for the Ballon d'Or. I think Kvaratskhelia coming into the team, his transition to the team looks seamless. He looks to be fitting and enjoying well with the other attackers, and Bradley Barcola and Desiree Doué look incredible, especially Doué of late over the last 2 games. I'm pretty sure he scored the weekend, and then he scored in the Cup, and I think last weekend as well. So Doué in incredible form as well for PSG. Now, for me, the key matchups in this game, actually, I think, because you're looking at the attackers, is I think the difference in quality in the fullbacks between in both teams, right? I especially look at Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, who I think is one of the best, if not the best, fullback duo in Europe at the moment. Comparing Nuno Mendes and Hakimi to, no disrespect, Matty Cash and Ian Maatsen, who I think both are good players. I mean, it could be, and it might end up being Conso or even Digne playing out there, who I think maybe would be better suited for this game, just because I don't really trust Maatsen or Cash to hold themselves against the likes of Ousmane Dembele, Kavicha, and Barcola. I think Konsa is one of the more underrated defenders in the Premier League, and I think he can do a shift at right back against these wingers. I think Digne, you're obviously with Maatsen, you get a more athletic player with Maatsen, but I think Digne, the experience, I think that would probably be the more favorable pickup between the two. Other key matchups. Defensively, I think both these two teams have great center backs, but PSG center backs are a level above. One key thing to note is Marquinhos will be missing the first leg. I don't think PSG will skip a beat without him, though. In my personal opinion, I think Marquinhos is a good defender. I think he's a bit overrated personally, but I think he's a good defender. Will PSG be missing their captain? We'll see. I think Pacho has been incredible for PSG of late. We look at Villa. I think the return of Paul Torres is crucial for this tie. I think if Villa were to do anything, it's going to come down to him in terms of his defensive prowess. I think Tyrone Mings is all right. We'll see how he fares at at this level, I don't know if he can do it against PSG. I have my doubts, but I think he's a good defender overall. Looking at the two goalkeepers, I think both goalkeepers are sound enough. Emery Martinez, in my opinion, is the better goalkeeper, or at least he's the one that performs better within the big games. He's been a player who seems to rise to the big occasion, a player who thrives off big performances in big games. While Donnarumma is a player who you can have your question marks about at certain times, especially of late for PSG, especially in their recent Champions League exits. The midfield battle is definitely the most interesting of the battles, in my opinion. I think you look at a midfield battle between Fabian, Vitinha, Neves, even if someone like Zaire Emery was to come in against the likes of Yuri Tielemans, Amadou Onana, Morgan Rogers. I think for me, you kind of have. I think both midfields are technically inept. I think PSG's midfield is definitely more technical than Villa's. I'm not saying that Villa's midfield cannot compete on a technical level with PSG's, but I think it's just a level above. However, I think the one weakness you can say with PSG's midfield is maybe their size and their athleticism. Like, yes, Fabian is a tall player. You can question maybe his mobility. I think you look at Villa, like the likes of Yuri Tielemans, Onana, and Morgan Rogers. Could they make this into a physical game for Neves and Vitinha? I mean, both these guys are young guys. They can run for sure, but just in terms of the size and the stature, like I think that's the type of game Villa have to play to make it an ugly game for PSG. Just make it hard for their midfield to find any rhythm, because you can see if you watch PSG, like Neves, Vitinha, that's kind of metronome for PSG in terms of cultivating their attacks this season and getting the ball into their star players such as Dembele and Barcola. How I actually think this tie will play out, again, PSG will be the main protagonist in this game. I think they'll be the team that dominates the ball in the majority of the time, especially in the first leg at Paris. In Paris, I think it comes down to PSG. I think they'll create chances against Villa. It comes down to whether or not they can put them away in terms of who will be that clinical finisher. In terms of Dembele this season, he looks to be that. However, like as we saw in the first leg, PSG, fail to take your chances. Even a poor Liverpool team can come away with a result there, as undeserving as maybe that result was, right? Now the second leg, for me, this is where Villa can really shine. For me, for Villa in the first leg, is comes down to the fact if they cannot get blown out. If you lose the first leg, let's say 3-0, greater, like big scoreline 3-0, I would even say like a 2 goal deficit is salvageable. Maybe even like I would say you can get away there with like a 1 goal deficit. Ideally like a draw, or if you can somehow win in Paris. I don't see it for Villa, but for me, it's gonna come down to the second leg being at Villa Park, taking that energy. You've seen Villa against the big teams at Villa Park. That's a hard place to go to. We saw Bayern there. Villa beat Bayern. I know Juve went there and got a result, but for me, they got unlucky there. Villa, Liverpool this season gone to Villa. They've struggled there. I think Villa Park is really they'll have to feed off the energy in the second leg in order to win that game. Now, PSG, will they be intimidated by the Villa crowd? I don't really think so. I think this PSG team has a bit more resilience to them than latter years, or previous years rather. You think about PSG in the Champions League as a team that collapses. That's a frail team that when things are not going well, they go down tools and all of a sudden they just collapse. I think this team is a little bit different to them, because I think the last time I answered a lot of questions about the resilience of this team. Like after the first leg, battering Liverpool, right? Liverpool somehow scam a win against you in the last minute, and everyone thinks, oh well, this is the PSG of old. You know what I'm saying? They haven't learned. Like they're going away to Anfield now. Like can they do it at Anfield? Like after like putting in such a great performance, but then ended up just like losing at the end. And you saw PSG right go to Anfield, one of the most difficult way grounds in Europe, get a result, beat Liverpool on penalties. Not easy task to do it all, right? And you saw a mentality of resilience, a strength within the group in order this PSG group to maybe go and win something, maybe go make a real run at the Champions League this season. So, do I think they'll be intimidated by the fact by going to Villa Park and the energy of the whole end? I don't think so. So, my prediction for this tie, I think it's going to be very interesting. I think Unai Emery's tactical ineptness will keep this tie close. I don't think, or when I say close, like it won't be like PSG smashing Villa. I just don't see it happening. I think Unai Emery will set his team up as well as he can. However, I think PSG just have the better quality players. They have more players with X factor in my opinion. I know you have the likes of Marco Asensio and Rashford who can cause something. Morgan Rogers who's been having a great season. Ollie Watkins, what can he do? I think there's plenty of question. Even like the likes of Daniel Mallon, I think he got his first goal for Villa against Brighton. Maybe he can do something in this game. But regardless of the fact, I'm going PSG with a 3-1 win at home at the Parc des Princes, and in the second leg at Villa Park, I'm going with a 2-2 draw. I think this game is poised for scoring opportunities. There's just too many players who can do something on the field. However, I think PSG are just better equipped in the majority of positions on the field. I think they have the better players. I think they're just a better team, and the Villa is coming in with a lot of form and a lot of momentum. However, I think PSG will just be too much for them. So those are my predictions for the Champions League quarterfinals. We'll see how many I get right. Hope you enjoyed the video, and later.